Derek Walker was just another ordinary guy trying to escape the monotony of his life. An engineer from Earth, he'd spent most of his days fixing broken machines and dreaming of something, anything, that might add a little excitement to his existence. So when the opportunity arose to visit the Grand Intergalactic Trade Festival, he jumped at it. After all, it wasn't every day a human got invited to explore the wonders of alien civilizations. The festival was held on Altheria, a planet known for its breathtaking beauty and diverse cultures. The air sparkled with floating lights, and the streets were filled with beings of all shapes and sizes, speaking languages Derek couldn't even begin to comprehend. He wandered around, wide-eyed, and in awe of the towering crystalline structures and the vibrant market stalls brimming with alien goods. For once, he felt like he wasn't just a small cog in a big machine. He was part of something larger, something extraordinary. But as fate would have it, Derek's ordinary life was about to take a very unexpected turn. Near the center of the festival was a grand pavilion, adorned with shimmering banners that seemed to shift colors in the sunlight. Curious, Derek wandered closer and saw a group of tall, elegant aliens gathered inside. Their robes glowed faintly, and their movements were graceful, almost otherworldly. At the center of the group stood a woman who was clearly the focus of attention. Her presence was magnetic. She had radiant, silver-toned skin, eyes that gleamed like liquid gold, and a crown that seemed to hum with energy. Derek didn't realize it at first, but this was Queen Lyra, the ruler of the Altherian Empire. As Derek stepped closer, he noticed Lyra glance his way. To his surprise, she smiled, a warm, inviting smile that made his heart skip a beat. Not wanting to appear rude, he smiled back and awkwardly waved. The crowd around her suddenly went silent, their eyes fixed on him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Feeling out of place, Derek decided to bow politely, something he'd seen a few others do. "Oh, hi," he said nervously, not sure if she'd even understand him. "Just passing by." Lyra tilted her head, her expression shifting from amusement to something more serious. She raised her hand and spoke a single word in her language, but before Derek could react, the crowd erupted in cheers. "What just happened?" Derek muttered, glancing around in confusion. A tall alien approached him, a stern look on his face. "Human," the alien said in perfect English, "you have just proposed marriage to Queen Lyra, and she has accepted." Derek froze, his jaw dropping. "Wait, what? No, this has to be some kind of mistake." The alien's expression remained unflinching. "There is no mistake. The bow you performed is a sacred gesture among our people. By tradition, you are now the royal consort of the Queen." Derek's heart pounded. He looked back at Lyra, who seemed calm, too calm for someone who had just been married to a complete stranger. And just like that, Derek's ordinary life was over. Derek sat frozen in disbelief as the reality of his situation sank in. The towering alien who had delivered the shocking news showed no hint of humor or sarcasm. This wasn't some elaborate prank or cultural misunderstanding. It was very real. "Wait," Derek stammered, raising his hands in protest. "I can't be married to her. I don't even know her. This is insane." The stern alien, who introduced himself as Advisor Veller, remained unfazed. "The gesture you made is sacred to Altherian tradition. To withdraw now would be an insult to the Queen and our people. The consequences would not be favorable." Derek blinked, his stomach churning. What kind of consequences? Veller's golden eyes narrowed. War, disgrace, exile. Perhaps all three. "Oh, great," Derek muttered under his breath, rubbing his temples. "What have I gotten myself into?" Before he could argue further, Queen Lyra approached. Up close, her presence was even more overwhelming. Her silver skin shimmered like moonlight, and her golden eyes seemed to pierce straight through him. Yet there was no anger or annoyance in her expression, just calm curiosity. "You are unique," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. though slightly accented. No one has ever made such a bold gesture at the festival before. You intrigue me, human. Bold. Derek said, his voice rising in disbelief. I was just being polite. Where I come from, a bow is just, I don't know, manners. Lyra tilted her head, considering his words. On Altheria, a bow symbolizes a promise, a declaration of unity. It is not done lightly. Derek groaned, running a hand through his hair. Well, on Earth, it's just something you do when you're nervous around important people. Her lips twitched in what might have been the start of a smile. Perhaps our traditions are not so different. Even so, the bond has been made. Before Derek could respond, Valor stepped forward. Your Majesty, the royal court awaits. We must formally announce the union. Derek's heart sank. Announce it? No. Can't we just? I don't know. Call this off quietly. Lyra's expression softened, but her tone was firm. To undo this would be seen as a rejection of my leadership. The Empire is already fragile. If my people see me as weak, it could spark unrest. Derek's panic grew. So what happens now? Lyra regarded him carefully. You will come with me to the palace. As my consort, you will be introduced to the court and prepared for your role. My role? Derek's voice cracked. I'm just a guy who fixes broken machines. I'm not cut out for whatever this is. You are more capable than you think, Lyra said, turning away. Come, Derek Walker. Your life has changed. You may as well face it with dignity. Derek sighed, feeling trapped but unable to argue. The next thing he knew, he was being led toward a grand, gleaming ship. As it lifted off the ground, Derek stared out the window, watching the festival disappear below. His ordinary life was officially over. The royal palace of Altheria was unlike anything Derek had ever imagined. It wasn't just a building. It was a living, breathing marvel. Towering spires shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, and translucent walls revealed glowing energy streams flowing like rivers through the structure. Every step he took felt like entering a different world, filled with strange, beautiful architecture and beings that stared at him with equal parts curiosity and disdain. Derek couldn't help but feel out of place. He wasn't royalty. He wasn't even particularly special back on Earth. Yet here he was, being escorted through golden halls as if he belonged. Queen Lyra walked beside him, calm and composed, while he fidgeted with the hem of his jacket. Is it just me, Derek muttered, or do your people seem less than thrilled about me? Lyra glanced at him, her golden eyes unreadable. They are skeptical. Altherians value strength, intelligence, and poise. You are an outsider. They will need convincing. Great, Derek said under his breath. No pressure. As if on cue, they entered a vast chamber where members of the royal court had gathered. The nobles were a mix of elegant and intimidating figures, their robes shimmering in colors Derek couldn't name. They whispered amongst themselves, their sharp gazes fixed on him. Velar, ever the stern advisor, stepped forward and raised his voice. Members of the court, today we welcome Derek Walker, the Queen's chosen consort. Chosen, Derek whispered to Lyra. More like accidental. Lyra gave him a side glance but said nothing. Valor continued. As per tradition, the consort must prove their worth through the trials of unity. Only then can they stand beside the Queen. Derek's stomach dropped. Trials? What trials? Lyra turned to him, her voice low. It is customary. You must complete 3 trials that demonstrate your compatibility with Altherian values: intellect, adaptability, and courage. Do not worry. I believe you will manage. Manage, Derek whispered harshly. You could have mentioned this sooner. Before he could argue further, the first trial began. Derek was led to a chamber filled with glowing puzzles that hovered in the air. Symbols and patterns shifted constantly, forming a complex sequence that made his head spin. This is the trial of intellect, Valor announced. Solve the sequence. Derek stared at the floating shades, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on him. I fix machines, he muttered, not alien Rubik's cubes. But as he focused, he began to notice patterns, repetitions, logical sequences. Taking a deep breath, he applied his knowledge of engineering, breaking the problem down step by step. After what felt like hours, the puzzle clicked into place. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Derek turned to Lyra, who gave him a small, approving nod. "One down," Derek said, trying to calm his racing heart. "What's next?" Veller's expression didn't change. "The trial of adaptability. You will face it tomorrow." As the nobles filed out, Derek slumped against the wall. He wasn't sure how, but he had survived the first trial. The question was, could he survive the rest? The next morning, Derek found himself standing in an arena surrounded by towering crystalline walls that shimmered in the Altharian sunlight. The crowd of nobles and dignitaries filled the stands, their expressions a mix of skepticism and thinly veiled amusement. Derek felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on him like a ton of bricks. In the center of the arena stood Queen Lyra, regal as ever. She met his gaze with a calm confidence that Derek wished he could borrow for just a moment. Beside her, Veller addressed the audience. "The second trial," Veller declared, his voice echoing through the arena, "is the trial of adaptability. The consort must demonstrate their ability to navigate and overcome unforeseen challenges, for adaptability is key to surviving in our ever-changing galaxy." Derek raised an eyebrow, already feeling nervous. What does that mean exactly? As if in answer, a loud rumble filled the arena. Derek spun around to see the ground shifting and morphing before his eyes. Platforms rose and fell, creating a maze of obstacles, pits, and walls. But that wasn't the worst part. From one of the pits emerged a massive, multi-limbed creature with glowing blue eyes and armored scales. Its growl shook the air as it locked onto Derek. "You've got to be kidding me," Derek muttered. "This is your idea of a trial? I'm a mechanic, not an action hero." "The creature will not harm you if you use your wit," Veller called out. "The goal is to retrieve the orb from the center of the maze and return it to this platform." The crowd grew silent as the challenge began. Derek hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding, before taking a deep breath. "Okay, Derek," he muttered to himself. "You're good at fixing things. Think of this as a machine. Break it down." He studied the maze quickly, noticing how the platforms moved in repeating patterns. The creature, though intimidating, seemed to follow specific paths, as if patrolling certain zones. Derek realized it wasn't just a random obstacle, it was part of the challenge's design. He made his move, sprinting toward the first platform, and leaping just as it started to rise. The crowd gasped, clearly not expecting such a bold move from the lowly human. Derek didn't stop to think. He ducked under swinging obstacles, timed his jumps over gaps, and used his knowledge of patterns to stay one step ahead of the creature. At one point, the beast cornered him against a wall. Derek frantically scanned his surroundings and spotted a loose piece of machinery on the platform. Thinking fast, he grabbed it and threw it at a glowing panel above the creature. The impact triggered a spark, distracting the beast long enough for Derek to slip away. Finally, he reached the glowing orb at the center of the maze. He grabbed it and retraced his steps, narrowly avoiding the creature as it chased him back toward the platform. With a final leap, Derek landed in front of Lyra, holding the orb triumphantly. The arena erupted in stunned silence, followed by hesitant applause. Derek, panting and sweating, looked up at Lyra. She smiled faintly, the first real sign of approval he'd seen. "You are full of surprises, Derek Walker," she said softly. Derek let out a nervous laugh. "Yeah, well, surprises seem to be the only thing I'm good at." As the crowd dispersed, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that he'd earned a small measure of their respect. But one trial still remained, and he had no idea what was coming next. Derek barely had time to rest before the announcement for the final trial came. He stood in a dimly lit chamber, the air heavy with tension. The whispers of the nobles outside seeped through the walls, their doubts and skepticism echoing in his mind. Derek knew this was the one that mattered most, the trial of courage. If he failed now, everything he'd endured would have been for nothing. Queen Lyra entered the chamber, her regal presence as commanding as ever. She stopped in front of him, her golden eyes searching his face. This trial will test your bravery. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. Do you understand? Derek let out a shaky breath and nodded. Yeah, got it. Be brave even when I'm scared out of my mind. A faint smile touched her lips. Precisely. She gestured to a doorway behind him. You will enter the Chamber of Shadows. What you encounter inside will reflect your greatest fears. You must face them to prove your worth. Derek froze. Wait, what kind of fears? Like bad memories, nightmares, spiders? Lyra didn't answer directly. Each person's trial is unique. What lies within the chamber will reveal itself only to you. That didn't make him feel better, but he knew there was no backing out. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a dark hallway lit by a faint, eerie glow. Derek swallowed hard, glanced back at Lyra, and stepped inside. The door sealed shut behind him, and the hallway plunged into darkness. Derek's footsteps echoed as he moved forward, his heart pounding with every step. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on him. Suddenly, the space around him shifted, and he found himself standing in the middle of a familiar scene, a workshop from Earth, cluttered with tools and broken machines. It was his old workplace, but it wasn't right. The room was empty, the lights flickering, and an eerie silence filled the air. Derek, a faint voice called, sending chills down his spine. He turned to see a figure standing in the shadows. It was his father, at least it looked like him. But there was something off about the way he moved, the way his voice echoed unnaturally. You'll never be good enough, the figure said, its voice cold and distant. You fix machines, but you'll never fix yourself. Derek's chest tightened. He hadn't heard those words in years, but they still stung as if they were brand new. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. This isn't real, he muttered. You're not real. The figure stepped closer, its face twisting into something monstrous. You'll fail, just like you always do. Derek took a step back, fear gripping him. But then he remembered Lyra's words. Courage is acting in spite of fear. No, he said firmly. I'm not that person anymore. I've come this far, and I'm not giving up now. The figure lunged at him, but Derek stood his ground. As it reached him, the illusion shattered like glass, leaving him in the empty hallway once more. A faint light appeared in the distance, guiding him forward. When Derek emerged from the Chamber of Shadows, his legs were shaky, but his head was held high. The nobles stared in stunned silence as Villar announced his success. Queen Lyra approached, her expression unreadable. You faced your fear and overcame it, she said softly. You have passed. Derek managed a weak smile. Barely. As the crowd murmured in approval, Derek realized something. He wasn't just surviving these trials, he was changing. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. The palace glittered under the Altherian moons as celebrations began. Derek had officially passed all 3 trials, and the court was gathered in the grand hall for a feast in his honor. The atmosphere buzzed with energy, the nobles seemingly more accepting of him, though many still watched him with cautious eyes. Derek, however, was too tired to care. He was just happy he wasn't being chased by a monster or solving puzzles for his life anymore. Sitting at the long banquet table beside Queen Lyra, Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The food, though strange-looking, tasted incredible, but he couldn't fully relax. Something felt off. Maybe it was the lingering suspicion in the eyes of some nobles, or the tension he noticed in Lyra's shoulders. You've done well, Lyra said suddenly, her voice soft but sincere. Few have passed the trials as gracefully as you. Derek chuckled nervously, poking at the glowing fruit on his plate. Graceful isn't exactly how I'd describe it, but thanks. I'm just glad it's over. She gave him a small smile, but her expression quickly turned serious. It is far from over. There are those who will not accept you, no matter how much you prove yourself. You must remain vigilant. Before Derek could respond, a loud crash echoed through the hall. Gasps erupted as the grand doors were flung open, and a group of masked figures stormed in, armed with glowing blade-like weapons. The room plunged into chaos. "Protect the Queen," Valor shouted, drawing a weapon of his own as guards swarmed in to confront the intruders. Derek's heart pounded as he instinctively grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her behind the table. "What the hell is going on?" "Assassins," Lyra said calmly, though her golden eyes burned with fury. "They are part of a faction that opposes my rule." Derek peeked over the table to see the attackers clashing with the guards. One of the assassins broke away from the group and charged straight for them. Derek froze for a split second before grabbing a nearby serving tray and hurling it at the assassin's head. The tray struck with a loud clang, knocking the attacker off balance. "Stay behind me," Derek shouted, his voice trembling but determined. The assassin recovered quickly, raising their weapon to strike. Derek's mind raced as he grabbed a chair, swinging it wildly. The blow connected, and the assassin staggered back, but Derek knew he couldn't keep this up. Just then, Lyra stepped forward, her hand glowing with a strange, crackling energy. She raised it, and a pulse of light shot from her palm, sending the assassin flying across the room. Derek stared at her, wide-eyed. "You could have done it the whole time." Lyra gave him a sharp look. "You handled it well." The remaining assassins were quickly subdued by the guards, but the damage was done. The feast was ruined, and whispers of unrest filled the hall. As Derek looked around, he realized this was no ordinary attack. This was a warning. Later, as they stood alone in a private chamber, Lyra turned to him. "This is the reality of being by my side. Danger will follow you now." Derek met her gaze, his fear fading into resolve. "I didn't ask for this, but I'm here now. If they're coming for you, they're coming for me too, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Lyra's stern expression softened. "Then we face it together." Derek nodded, realizing that his life was no longer his own. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. "You said." The days following the assassination attempt were filled with a sense of unease that permeated the palace. The royal guards doubled their patrols, and the nobles who had once regarded Derek with disdain now treated him with wary respect. It wasn't just the threat of attack that made the air heavy. It was the lingering tension between Derek and Queen Lyra, a bond that was slowly but surely growing, though neither of them fully understood it. Derek spent much of his time in the palace's quiet garden, trying to clear his mind. The beauty of the lush greenery, the vibrant flowers that seemed to glow in the moonlight, helped soothe his frayed nerves. He had never imagined his life would lead him here, to an alien world, surrounded by dangers, politics, and royal expectations. But every time he looked at Lyra, he couldn't help but feel there was something more between them than just a forced marriage. One evening, after a long day of meetings and preparations for a potential counterstrike against the faction that had attacked the palace, Lyra found him in the garden, staring out at the distant horizon. "Derek," she said softly, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her silver skin shimmering under the pale light of the twin moons. There was something different about her tonight, less the powerful queen and more human. She looked tired, like the weight of the galaxy was bearing down on her. "Hey," Derek replied, forcing a smile. "You should be resting, right?" She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to read something he wasn't sure was there. "I should," she said quietly. "But there's always something else. Always a war to prepare for, a decision to make. I don't know how you do it, Derek, Live your life without the burden of a crown. Derek shifted uncomfortably. I don't know how to do it either. But I do know one thing. I never expected to be here. To be part of all this. Lyra's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was a crack in her usual regal composure. She sat beside him, the warmth of her presence comforting. And yet you've proven yourself more than capable. More than I could have imagined. Derek chuckled lightly, though it was edged with exhaustion. I'm just a guy who happens to fix machines, but I guess fixing things on this scale requires more than just tools. You've shown a kind of strength I didn't expect, Lyra said, her voice almost a whisper. When I first chose you, when you were thrust into this role, I saw you as a necessity, a political move, nothing more. But now, I see something else. Derek turned to her, his heart racing. What do you see? She met his gaze, her eyes soft and vulnerable. I see a partner, someone I can trust, someone who isn't afraid to stand beside me, even when things seem impossible. The words hung in the air between them. Derek felt a weight settle in his chest, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if it was fear or something else entirely. Something that made his heart pound faster, something that made him want to stay by her side no matter what. He took a deep breath and, without thinking, reached out and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than anything else he had ever done. I don't know what the future holds, Lyra, he said, his voice steady. But I know I'm not backing out now. Not after everything we've been through. She squeezed his hand gently, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. Then we'll face whatever comes next, together. For the first time since arriving on Altheria, Derek felt like he truly belonged. Not just as a consort, but as something more, a partner. And perhaps, in some strange and unexpected way, a friend. The following days brought a new wave of tension to the palace. The failed assassination attempt had only been a small part of a much larger plan. Derek and Lyra learned that the faction responsible for the attack was rallying others, preparing for an open revolt. The whispers of rebellion were growing louder, and Lyra knew it was only a matter of time before war would find her doorstep again. Derek could see it in her eyes. The weight of the galaxy was on her shoulders. It was something he couldn't fully understand, but he could feel it. The burden of leadership, of holding an empire together, of not showing weakness. Lyra had always been strong, but now, as the threat of open conflict loomed, even her usual calm demeanor had begun to crack. We can't keep running from this, Derek said one evening as they sat together in her private chambers. The flickering light from the candles made her features look softer, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. Lyra looked up from her thoughts, her golden eyes focused on him. I know. The rebellion is growing stronger. We'll have to fight soon. Derek leaned forward, a sense of determination building in his chest. Then we fight. We face it head-on. Lyra smiled faintly, a spark of admiration in her gaze. You're not like any man I've met before. Most would be terrified, ready to flee. But you're here, standing beside me. You've proven more than I ever expected. Derek shook his head. I didn't sign up for a battle, but I'm not going to back down. We've come this far together. I'm not leaving you. She reached out, taking his hand. Thank you, Derek, for everything. As the days passed, the final battle drew closer. The palace was filled with the sound of soldiers preparing, the hum of energy weapons being charged, and the tension of a city on the brink of war. Derek wasn't used to this kind of life, but somehow he felt more alive than he ever had before. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. The day of the battle arrived. Derek stood beside Lyra, his heart pounding in his chest. The War Council had made their plan. The enemy would attack the palace in waves, hoping to break through the royal defenses. But Lyra was ready, and so was Derek. They had learned from the past, and now they would use everything at their disposal to protect their people. As the first wave of enemy soldiers stormed through the palace gates, Derek felt the adrenaline hit him. He had never been in a real battle before, but he wasn't going to let fear stop him. He picked up a weapon from the armory, a plasma rifle, and stood beside Lyra, ready to defend her at all costs. The fighting was intense. The enemy soldiers were skilled, but Derek's quick thinking and ability to adapt were his greatest weapons. He moved through the palace halls with precision, using the environment to his advantage, taking down enemies one by one. Lyra fought beside him, her power evident as she used her own abilities to strike down those who dared to challenge her. But the final battle wasn't just about physical strength, it was about unity. Derek and Lyra, together, were unstoppable. Their bond had become something more than just a political alliance. They had become true partners, fighting not just for their survival, but for each other. As the battle raged on, the final blow came when Derek and Lyra cornered the leader of the rebellion, the traitor who had once been part of Lyra's inner circle, the man who had orchestrated the assassination attempt. Derek stood by her side, his heart steady as she confronted the man who had betrayed her. "It's over," she said coldly. "You failed." With one last burst of energy, Lyra's attack took down the traitor, and the battle was won. The palace was safe, for now, and the rebellion had been crushed. In the aftermath, as they stood together, Lyra turned to Derek. "You've proven yourself more than I could have ever imagined. You are no longer just my consort. You are my equal, my partner." Derek smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. "I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever." Together, they had faced the storm and come out stronger than ever. The war was over, but the scars of battle were far from healed. The palace, once filled with celebration, now stood in eerie silence. The rebellion had been crushed, but it had come at a cost. Many lives had been lost, some of them close to Lyra, and the emotional toll weighed heavily on both her and Derek. Derek had always been a man of action, someone who could fix things with his hands. But this was different. He couldn't fix the pain that lingered in the eyes of the survivors. He couldn't undo the lives that had been lost in the struggle for power. And that, more than anything else, felt like a failure. As he stood by the window in Lyra's private chambers, staring out over the city, he felt a deep sense of unease. The streets were calm now, but there was a tension in the air, as if the people were waiting for something to go wrong again. The peace they had fought for felt fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment. Lyra entered quietly behind him, her footsteps soft against the stone floor. Derek turned to face her, and for a moment, their eyes met, filled with unspoken understanding. She had never looked more regal, but there was something else beneath the surface, something that told him she was just as broken as he felt. "I don't know if we can ever truly be free of this," Derek said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of what they had been through. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "The price of power is always high. It's never just about the battles we fight. It's about what we lose along the way." Derek sighed, rubbing his temples. "I didn't expect to become part of a war. I didn't expect to be a soldier." "You've been more than that," Lyra said softly. "You've been my strength, the strength I never knew I needed." Her words struck something deep within him. He had always seen himself as someone who fixed things, machines, problems, but never people. Never a queen, never a leader. Yet here he was, standing by her side, in a role he never imagined. And he was beginning to realize something. Maybe, just maybe, this was where he was meant to be. "You're right," Derek said, his voice steady now. "We've been through too much together to walk away now." Lyra reached out, gently taking his hand in hers. "I don't want to walk away. I can't. But I can't do this alone either." Derek squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. Was it love? Loyalty? Respect? Maybe all of those things, and more. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew this. They were in this together, no matter what came next. Then we face it together, Derek said, his voice firm with resolve. No matter the cost. Lyra smiled, the weight of her crown and her responsibility still heavy, but somehow lighter with Derek by her side. Together, she agreed. Outside the palace, the world was still uncertain. But in this moment, as Derek and Lyra stood side by side, there was a sense of quiet strength. They had weathered the storm, and though the future was unclear, they knew they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The palace was quieter than it had been in weeks. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers that had been brought in to commemorate the victory. But the people of Altheria were still recovering. The scars of battle, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. But for the first time since the war began, there was a sense of hope in the air. Derek stood in the royal garden, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The twin moons of Altheria hung low in the sky, casting a gentle light over the landscape. He had spent so much time in the chaos of the palace, the battles, and the plans for the future, that he hadn't had a moment to just breathe, to take in the peace that, for the first time, felt real. Lyra approached him silently, her footsteps soft on the grass. Derek turned to face her, and their eyes met. Her expression was one of quiet strength, but there was something new in her gaze, something that reflected a deep change in both of them. "Do you ever wonder," Derek began, his voice thoughtful, "how we ended up here?" Lyra smiled softly, stepping closer. "All the time. I mean, 1 minute I'm fixing machines back on Earth," Derek continued, "and the next, I'm fighting alongside an alien queen, saving her kingdom. It's a bit hard to wrap my head around." Lyra chuckled, the sound light and free. "Life has a way of surprising us. It wasn't the path either of us expected, but here we are." Derek nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known was possible. In the chaos, in the uncertainty, he had found something real, something worth fighting for. And it wasn't just the throne or the kingdom. It was Lyra. It was her strength, her resilience, and the bond they had forged together. "You know," Derek said, his voice steady now, "I never thought I'd find a place where I truly belonged. But with you here, I feel like maybe this is where I'm supposed to be." Lyra's gaze softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "I never imagined I'd find someone like you either. Someone who would stand by me, not for political gain, but because you believe in me. In us." Derek's chest tightened as he looked into her eyes. There was so much unspoken between them, so much that had been built in the heat of battle, in moments of fear, and in the quiet understanding they shared. He took a deep breath. "So what happens now?" Lyra's smile deepened, and she stepped closer, her hand still holding his. "Now, we rebuild the kingdom. We rebuild trust, and we face whatever comes together." Derek nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. They had come so far, from enemies and allies to something more. Their bond was unbreakable now, forged in the heat of their shared struggles. And as they stood together in the garden, with the future uncertain but theirs to shape, Derek knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just a man who fixed machines. He was a man who had found a purpose, a family, and a future. Lyra turned toward him, her eyes full of quiet resolve. "This is just the beginning, Derek. Whatever comes, we face it as one." And with that, as the stars above them shone brightly, Derek knew that no matter what the future held, he would always stand beside her. Together, they would face it all.